Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this training on using bulk edit and import templates in ArchivesSpace. I'm Miloche Kottman, and I'm joined today by my fellow trainers, Dan Michelson, Laura Woodford, Margaret Kidd, and Rebecca Bagno. Let's go to the next slide so that you guys at least have something to look at while I'm jabbering away. In advance of this training, you received an email with an agenda for the training with links to all of the materials you will need to participate in this workshop and to continue learning after the training is over. We may not stick exactly to the agenda, but we will take the planned breaks included in the agenda at the appropriate time. Included in the course materials is a quick start guide you can use to supplement today's training. Test what you have learned today by using the guide and by creating examples within your own ArchivesSpace instance or in the ArchivesSpace sandbox available via our website. You can access the ArchivesSpace sandbox from the ArchivesSpace Getting Started website, which is linked in your guide with other useful resources. There is also a link to a training evaluation at the end of the agenda that we hope you complete at the end of this training. We are using Zoom webinar for this training, and your microphone and camera are both muted. If you'd like to ask questions of the trainer, we ask that you use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. If you have general questions or need some other form of assistance, please feel free to reach out in the chat. Some questions will be read and answered during the allocated time for Q&A. We are using the latest version of ArchivesSpace for this training, which is the version 4.0. If you are currently using an earlier version of ArchivesSpace, keep in mind some of the features you see today may not be available to you at home. We also won't be able to troubleshoot issues with your implementations of ArchivesSpace at your organization. If you have a question or issue with your implementation, please email us at archivespacehome@lyrasis.org. Also, keep in mind this workshop assumes familiarity with ArchivesSpace terminology and archival concepts. If you don't have this necessary background, I recommend reviewing the recordings of a recent ArchivesSpace Basics training linked on the ArchivesSpace Getting Started webpage. Finally, please keep in mind there are many participants in this workshop coming from a variety of institutions and experience levels. Remember that the ArchivesSpace Code of Conduct applies to all ArchivesSpace events, including virtual events. Please remember to be considerate and respectful in your interactions in the Q&A and chat. And with that, we'll get started. Let's see. I could go ahead and close that. So this is page 4 of your quick start guide. ArchivesSpace allows import of data from standardized records as well as comma-separated values from spreadsheets. By importing legacy data, you can centralize the management of information about your collections within one application. This chart describes all the many different spreadsheets and/or XML, CSV, etc. files that you could use to import data. The agent records you could import using EAC CPF XML. It's an XML format. If you have EADs, you could import those. Mark XML can be used to import resource records, accession records, agents, and subjects from bibliographic records or just plain agent records. The comma-separated files are accession records, assessment records, digital object records, location records, and subject records. And then we have Excel or CSV, depending on what type of programs you have on your computer, to load archival objects onto an existing resource record, or digital objects linked to existing archival object records. So in this session, we'll be talking about the last 2 rows of this chart, the comma-separated files, which are referred to as CSV files, and Excel or CSV spreadsheets. Let's see. We could close that. And now let's go here. On the Getting Started with ArchivesSpace web page, if you go to Resources for Users and then go down to Migration Tools and Data Mapping, and then scroll down a little bit. In this column is the Data Import and Exports map. So you can download CSVs, spreadsheets of the mapping for accession records, and then you could also download the CSV template. So for people who may not have access to the bulk import templates any other way, this is a way that you could at least go in and take a look at things. And the maps, the mapping tool things are usually pretty good. Let's go ahead and download the accession mapping. And we'll take a look at that in its folder. So I downloaded the CSV and mapping for accessions. And so if you've never seen a crosswalk before, they're usually tables that tell you this particular field goes here, and it tells you what kind of data should be in that field and if there's any special information about it. So like this, the processing priority, you could only use high, medium, and low, so don't go making up stuff. So that is particularly handy. That's pretty much it for the functional overview of the importing tools that we have. Let's actually get down to it. Let's log in to ArchivesSpace, and we'll be told that our password, everybody knows it, which is fine. So I'm going to explain how to select the appropriate spreadsheet. The spreadsheets are available under this gear menu here. You would click on the down arrow and then choose bulk import templates. This is the best bet for getting your bulk import templates rather than using things that you might have downloaded in version 3.5 or earlier, because this way you'll have the most up-to-date template available as for the links here. So one thing I want to point out is this bolded information. Do not delete the header row, add additional columns, or rearrange existing columns. Now, some of these the instructions on the ArchivesSpace manual will tell you that you can, and usually if it tells you specifically that this particular spreadsheet can be edited and deleted, etc., then you could go ahead and believe it. But for the most part, I recommend never deleting. Just hide the fields if it bothers you, and certainly don't rearrange things. So here's the list of things. You'll see some say CSV and some say XLSX. CSV stands for comma separated values. These files are plain text with data separated by commas. The data is stored as raw data, which means there is no formatting formulas or other advanced features. You can open CSV files in text editors like Notepad or spreadsheet software like Excel or Google Sheets. Please note, depending on your settings, if you open a CSV file in Excel, the program might helpfully reformat some of your data, for example, the dates. Very annoying. XLSX files are for use with Microsoft Excel or compatible programs and contain formatting, drop-downs, and other Excel functionality like using the fill handle to autofill series or numbers. Let's take a look at the actual accession CSV. So you would click on the download button, and again, I'm using Chrome, so it downloads to my download folder. Let's open it up. And here it is, not very attractive. It has a header row that tells you the label name of the field, and you could scroll over. And then this first line here is a sample record. Obviously, if you use this, make sure you delete the sample, otherwise it'll be added to your instance. So let's go back to ArchivesSpace. Yeah, you can use so I downloaded this, and I also have the mapping, if it wants to open. And so you could use them in concert. And so you could go, okay, so what is this session title field supposed to be? And you go up here to, this is in alphabetical order, which is kind of annoying as opposed to the order it is on the spreadsheet. So the session title is your title, and it should be a text field. So that's how you could kind of use them in concert. I recommend having two screens, but it makes things easier to use to fill this thing out. So there's that. The assessment, so the accession CSV obviously creates accession records. The assessment CSV, the one next to it, creates and links assessments to existing accessions, resources, archival objects, or digital objects. This AO here in bulk import AO stands for archival object. So this is the bulk import archival object CSV, and you also have the same thing only as an XLSX. Let's download both of them so that you could see the difference. We'll download that one, and we'll download the spreadsheet, and we'll come in here. Okay, so let's look at the bulk import CSV in Excel. So even though it's in Excel, it's not really an Excel document. So it's like the other one, it's pretty basic, but it doesn't even, it has two different rows. Don't delete them. And it does not have a sample row like the accession did. Now let's look at the one that's the spreadsheet. And you'll see lovely colors, and some of these fields even have drop down filled out for you so that you'll always get it correct. Well, in theory, oh, I have to enable editing. Very annoying. All right, so they'll have drop-down fields that are pre-filled out, so all you have to do is make choices, which makes things very handy. You could add drop-down fields for some of these other things that don't have them also if you want to customize your own templates. So let's go back to ArchivesSpace. No, I don't want to save it. Okay, so the bulk import archival object CSV and an Excel spreadsheet create archival objects and attach them to existing resource records. So you have to have at least the base record in there before you could import the archival object one. Then you'll also see the bulk import digital object CSV and the bulk import digital object Excel spreadsheet. Both of these are used if you have a resource record already in ArchivesSpace and it has archival objects already attached. And so these two spreadsheets will then attach digital objects to those existing archival objects. Now, if you don't have a record you want to link things to, you just want to create brand new digital objects, you would use the digital object CSV. You could also create new location records. Please note that this template is for creating the location records themselves, not actually linking the materials to locations. And then you could create subjects via CSV also. So with that basic instructions, I'm going to turn things over to Dan, who will demonstrate the bulk import archival object spreadsheet.
All righty, thanks. Spencer, I'm Dan Michelson. I'm the collections archivist at Smith College. I've been using the bulk importer since it was a plugin, then was called the Harvard spreadsheet importer or something. Anyway, so I'll be talking about the archival object bulk importer. Since you all should be familiar with creating records in the staff interface, I'm not going to cover things like how the various parts of an archival object and its subrecords work, except as pertains specifically to the importer. As mentioned, I'll be only covering the importer as it works in the most recent version, 4.0. But there's really no notable difference between its functionality in 3.4 and 4.0. If you're on an earlier version than 3.4, there may be some differences, but it really hasn't been that heavily modified since it was incorporated into core code. So you should still find this helpful. I'm going to start with an overview of the importer, talk about the structure of the spreadsheet, walk through all the fields in the spreadsheet, demo the import process, show some common errors and how to identify and correct them, and then conclude with some tips and tricks to help you make the most out of the importer. So what does the importer do? The bulk archival object importer allows the use of a spreadsheet to add archival objects and associated subrecords and links with the additional capacity to create minimal top container, digital object, agent, and subject records. All of these records and links are created under a single resource record or an existing archival object within a resource record. You cannot use it to modify any existing records. So the spreadsheet is, as I said, the spreadsheet's available either as Excel or CSV. Excel is a lot easier to use and customize, but be warned, there is a stubborn bug that's been hard to eliminate where sometimes an import or a validation succeeds, but prevents further imports until the server is restarted. There's a very long and involved ticket in Jira for that because it's been very hard to track down. So I'll briefly show the CSV, but I'm going to otherwise use the Excel spreadsheet for the training as it has a lot of additional features. Note also that any version of the spreadsheet, including from when it was still a plugin, will work with the current version of the importer. You simply don't get the additional options of the most recent versions of the spreadsheet. And that's really useful because it means if you create a custom version of the template for your own use, you don't have to replace it until you want to. It's also great for people like me who made a lot of canned open refined operations to generate a spreadsheet for messy data years ago, and I do not want to redo all that work. A bit of an asterisk on that, though, is there's at least one case that I'll get to later where there are stricter validation rules than previously, which prevent some previously valid spreadsheets from importing properly. The spreadsheet still works, it's just that there's stricter rules on a particular field. And finally, before we dive into the spreadsheet, I want to explain how controlled values are handled. For fields based on a controlled value, the importer will first try to match what is entered to the translation. That's the text that appears in ArchivesSpace. If it fails to find a match, it will try to match against the value, which is what's in the database. If that fails, you get an error message. And the matches are exact, including capitalization. You cannot create new control values via the spreadsheet. If you have multiple control values with the same translation but different values, you should really clean up your controlled values. It's not that difficult, but also the importer will use the first matching value and provide a warning in the log file. Okay, enough of watching me drone on. Let's look at a spreadsheet while I drone on. Screen. That's not what I want. All right. Let me get some of these windows out of the way and give you a bigger picture. Okay, so the Excel version has 3 sheets. You're going to use all your work is going to be done in the data sheet. The documentation sheet has some like really old information about how the spreadsheet works that I'm pretty sure has been there since the first version of the plugin. There's also a sheet 2 that looks like it's for populating dropdowns, but it doesn't do anything. So only the data sheet impacts the import, so you can modify the other sheets or create new ones as desired. So the top 5 lines of the spreadsheet are special. The first one doesn't actually do anything, it's just a descriptor. The second one provides categories to help organize these columns. The third one tells you what ArchivesSpace field, so the database field, well, more or less, that it's mapped to, and then sometimes provides additional information about how the mapping works. The fourth line is where the actual magic happens. With one big exception that I will get to momentarily, never edit line 4, you'll break things. And then line 5 has the field names as translated into something more useful for data entry. Aside from line 4, you can change any of the text without impacting the importer. So the Excel spreadsheet has some basic color coding to help with data entry. Red text means the field is or may be required. Most of those cases should be familiar from the staff interface. It also uses different background colors to help distinguish the different subrecords. So you can see the language is in red, and then the dates are in blue, and blah, blah, blah. You can change, if you want to change colors, go for it. It's not going to impact the importer. As mentioned, there are some existing drop-downs provided in the spreadsheet by default. I really recommend, if you're going to use this more than just a couple times, and you probably are if you're at this session, I really recommend creating your own version of the template with your own drop-down values. Saves a lot of time, prevents a lot of errors. We don't use class or other level at Smith, so that is not an option that I want to give people. I'll show you at the end what I've created for Smith specifically. So probably the most important improvement made to the importer after its initial release as a plugin is the ability to repeat certain columns in order to create or link to multiple records or subrecords. All the repeatable columns, except for digital objects, already have multiple sets in the template. Any such repeatable columns can be continued beyond the number already provided in the template without limit, and I'll demonstrate how to do that when we get to the first such column. Let's quickly look again at the CSV just to see how it looks differently. In the CSV, you've only got 2 special lines, which correspond to the 4th and 5th lines in the Excel version. So you start your data entry on line 3. As I mentioned earlier, all of the functionality is there. It is just much less user-friendly. Okay, back to the Excel version. Let's walk through the fields real quick. So there's actually a hidden column B for resource identifier. It does not do anything, so I will move on. All fields, all lines must have either the EAD ID or the URI of the resource record you're adding to. It is intended as a check to avoid accidentally importing to the wrong resource record. And I'll just show you real quick where to define that in ArchivesSpace. So here is your URI for the resource record. And then your EAD, and that's automatically generated. Your EAD ID is not. You would manually enter it in the find the data. If you want to specify ref IDs, which I don't recommend, you can add them here. Otherwise, they will be auto-generated just like when you use the staff interface. The archival object basic information section, that's these guys, contains the only fields other than the resource identifying information that are always required. Not all of them are required, but has some of them. So the title field functions exactly like it does in the staff interface, including allowing mixed content like title tags. You can add a component unique identifier if you like. So now we get to the single most confusing part of the entire spreadsheet, the hierarchical relationship. It's also one of the hardest for me to say. This field is so that we can convert a flat spreadsheet into a complex structure. So what you first want to do is determine whether you're going to be adding to the resource record itself or an existing archival object in the resource. If you're adding to the resource record, the first level of archival objects is just 1. If you don't have any further hierarchies, you just got a single inventory, you're done. Just everything's 1. But if you have, say, multiple series, each with their own set of archival objects, The archival object for the first series would be 1. The children in that series would all be 2. Then the archival objects for the next series would be 1. Its children would be 2, etc. And if you have additional levels of hierarchy, you continue to increment the children by 1. I am going to show you this in ArchivesSpace in a second, though, so don't feel like you have to grasp this entirely. Now, if you're adding to an existing archival object in the resource record, you do the exact same thing, except you start at 2 instead of 1. It's true regardless of how far down the hierarchy you're starting. So let's actually look how this works. So let me grab the example. Some of these fields, zoom in. So in this case, we have a somewhat complex hierarchical relationship. Just because I kept all my examples in a single document, I'm using an archival object as the first one. But so the first direct heading, we've got this file that starts at the beginning because it's the letter of transmittal. We've got a series of correspondence, then we've got a subseries, and then a bunch of files. And then we get another subseries B, subseries C, then we jump back up to a series. So you could see that as we go, well, actually, I'll just show you first. So you can see because level 2 is this first level underneath this archival object, even though we've got series with children and such, we also have this one item, but ArchivesSpace, the importer doesn't care what it is. It's an archival object. So that's there. We have correspondence. It's 2, so it's still at that level. At 3, we would have this subseries. You can see, go down. And then underneath the 4 is all of these individual items. And then if you scroll down, you can see then the next subseries, this, like that. I don't know why this subseries only has one object. And then at the end of this, which is level 4, you're jumping back up to level 2, so you can do the new series. You can see that here. And it goes on. I was grabbing an old finding aid for this. So that's the basics. So honestly, once you sort of get it, it's not that complicated. It's just a little bit confusing, particularly the fact that you start with a 2 if you're going for the archival object. Now, you can also create sibling archival objects, which is why you start with a 2. There's actually no reason to necessarily do this, or there's no reason that you would need to do this, because you can always just create child objects by selecting the resource record or the appropriate archival object. And since it's not necessary and people often find it confusing, I don't train people to do this. But if you want to create a sibling object, say correspondence was how this ended and you want to add more, you want to add a series while selecting the archival object, you would start at 1 for all of these series and then 2. Again, there's no reason to. You could just either go up 1 level or go to the resource level and do it in with to me, a much more logical way. But again, you absolutely can do that. That's it. All right. Hopefully, oops, that was relatively clear. Again, I find this by far the most complicated part of the thing, and most commonly people get confused by. So the level of description and the other level field works the same as in the staff interface. Nothing really to say there. The publish field defaults to false. And the value here does 2 things. First, it sets the published status of the overall archival object. Second, it determines the default value for any notes that we'll be creating later. Restrictions apply, defaults to false if you don't put anything in. The processing note works the same as in the staff interface, but remember that this is the repository processing note that is internal only, not the EAD processing information note that we'll get to later. Okay. Languages. So the language section, again, same as in the staff interface. I'll note that there are some languages and scripts in which the translation uses characters that you may not have encoding for in your spreadsheet. At least I don't. So if you do want to use those, which I have not, but I did when I set up some control values, you'd have to use the value rather than the translation. So the language subrecord is our first repeatable subrecord. You can see we already have 2 sets in by default. You obviously don't need to use more than one, or you don't. Well, all you do is you copy all of the columns for that note. Oh, I'm getting an internet connection unstable. Hopefully people are still hearing me. You copy all of the columns for that note. Just going to cut, insert cut cells. Now, the next thing you do, and you need to, did I do something wrong here? What did I do? I don't know what I did. Let me try that again. Insert cut cells. There we go. Did I forget how this works? I don't know.
You want to copy and then paste copy.
Oh yeah, what? Oh wow, thank you. Wow, brain fart. Don't cut. See, I would have sat here for probably 5 minutes trying to figure that out. Thank you. All right, you copy and insert. Now you have this, but it's the same as the other one. That's no good. So what you do, this is the one time you edit line 4. And you could be done, but you probably also want to increment these field values just because otherwise it's confusing. Probably also want to make these free. You don't have to. Again, it doesn't matter what's in these fields for the importer, but you probably want to. Note that and that's particularly useful if you're gonna, which you probably will, want to hide line 4 when you're actually putting data in because you don't need to see it. But you'll get really confused. So note that the importer will stop looking for subrecords when it hits the first empty one. So if you have 3 sets of language subrecord columns, you can't fill in just sets 1 and 3. I don't know why you would, but worth mentioning. Okay, dates. So dates generally work the same as in the staff interface. Note that the date label defaults to creation and the date type defaults to inclusive. Also be aware, as mentioned, that the spreadsheet software will often helpfully encode entered dates, which can result in some data problems. We'll talk a bit more about this later. You can add multiple date subrecords just like with languages. Moving on to extent. Extents, same in the staff interface. Note that the portion defaults to whole. And you can add multiple extent records. Okay, containers. So when importing a spreadsheet, ArchivesSpace will first try to match to an existing top container in the resource record according to your top container type and your top container indicator. Other than adding links, it will not modify the existing top container record. If it fails to find an existing record, it will create a new one with the information provided. The exception is if you have a barcode. So if you have a barcode, it will actually check all top containers in the repository for a match. So if it finds one, it will take advantage of the uniqueness of container barcodes to match it to that top container, even if it isn't yet associated with the resource. Otherwise, it will create a new top container with the information provided, even if there is already a top container in the record that otherwise matches the container information. Again, you can't use it to add barcodes to an existing top container. So note, It's no longer possible to create container instances without the container type field having data. It used to be allowed. I'm not sure if that change was intentional, but it's not supported anymore. I'm not sure why, but I suspect it was a side effect of improving the top container matching. So you do basically need to have a type and indicator, not just an indicator. So container instances in their entirety are repeatable. I'm going to skip over digital objects. That's going to be covered with the separate digital object spreadsheet because it works basically the same way. It is repeatable also in here if you want to add multiple. Okay, let's take a drink. All right, so agents. As ArchivesSpace has three primary types of agents, all with unique data models, there are three different sets of columns for agent records. Software agents not supported. They all work the same way, but you just got to use the appropriate columns. Note that for whatever reason, the heading for person agent just says agent. I find that confusing, so I've changed that in our local template. If you want to link to an existing agent, sorry. I was just making sure I didn't forget something. Because I think I might have. Hold on. I sure did. I forgot to show a top containers example. Good Lord. All right, let's go back a second, top containers, so that I'm not just talking at you. You can see an example. All right, I just did a few basic examples, cleverly titled, examples 1 through 5, just to show how it works. So got a simple example 1 is just a simple single level. Example 2 and 3 are, again, you know, I don't need to talk too much about the difference with the child types and everything, since that's basic to ArchivesSpace. But you can see that, you know, and I imported these earlier because you don't want to wait for these. Not that these are long records, but I don't want to add complications. You can see that it just, you know, it put them in just as you'd expect, creating them when necessary. I also, in this example 4, we have, okay, it's box 1, but there's also stuff in box 2, which is why you have these multiple columns. Oops. And you can see that, in fact, yes, it did import the 2 separate examples. And then in example 5, what I did was I imported, you can see in the spreadsheet, it's also box 1, but it's got a barcode. It's a unique barcode. And so it did not link it to box 1. It created its own. And you can see that it is, for 1, it's got a barcode. And then looking in it in the record, you know, it's only linked to that one archival object, not the other box 1. Okay. Agents. All right, so if you want to link to an existing agent, you either provide its record ID or the exactly matching header string, including capitalization and punctuation in the spreadsheet. Let me just show you where what I'm talking about in the agents. So your record ID is not the URI, it's just this part. It's the end of the URI. That's the record ID. So you don't put in the whole URI. And then your heading is this guy. That whole thing has to be exactly as entered if you want to match. I mean, if you have the ID, you don't need to do that. You can just put the ID in. But if you want to do it by header, it has to match exactly. Um, If you include only the header string and it matches to more than one record, a new unpublished agent will be created with the header, with the provided header, and then it'll say disambiguate me, all in caps and exclamation point at the end. So you can deal with it later. If you provide just the record ID, but there is no actual record ID that matches, it'll also create a new unpublished agent. That one will say placeholder for agent type, record ID, not found, all in caps. So otherwise, if it doesn't match, a new agent record will be created. Unlike note subrecords, new agents created this way will always be set to publish, regardless of the published status of the archival object. So be aware of that. And keep in mind that the agent records for produced by the spreadsheet are extremely minimal. They consist only of the header string, which is mapped to primary name for persons and corporate bodies, and family name for families, and give a source of unspecified ingested source. Oddly, it also sets the name order to direct for person agents, so be aware that unless you're creating East Asian names, you'll probably need to change that to indirect if you go back to clean up the record and make it better structured. So again, let me show you some examples. All right, so all I did was I did one with an existing agent and one with a new agent. So the existing agent, I just said it's ID 16 and that the role is subject. So you can see it linked to what happened, whoever this person is, who was person 16. For the new agent example, don't ask me why I thought of George Brett as the first person when I had to write something down, but I did. He doesn't have a agent record, so I said role, creator, relator, collector. You can see it did create that, and if we look at the agent record, you can see how little is actually in it. In fact, I'm going to do edit so you can really see because of how much you can do. And see, it is a direct thing. So if you like break this out and say George, it's going to show up as George Brett in direct order, unless you change that. So just be aware of that. Not sure if that's an oversight, but that's how it works. Again, unspecified ingested source, you can't say where it came from. That's not an option in the thing. It's just going to throw that in there. Okay. Close that. Right. So again, record ID, not URI, header string, and role and relator is all you've got. And the role defaults to creator. All columns are repeatable. Okay, subjects. Subjects are very similar to agents. If you want to link to an existing subject, again, you provide the record ID, not the URI, and the exact matching header string, including capitalization and punctuation. I know, again, it is most the same, but here's your record ID, and then this one's pretty simple for your heading, if you want to put those in. Again, like agents, if you include only the header string and it matches to more than one record, a new subject agent or new subject record will be created with the provided header with disambiguate me appended, so you can deal with it later. Note that this will appear in the PY because all subjects in ArchivesSpace are published. You cannot have an unpublished subject. Unlike agents, no record will be created if you just provide a record ID and it doesn't match, it will just give you an error. So subject type defaults to topical. subject source defaults to unspecified ingested source, but you can, unlike with agents, you can supply a value as long as it matches. You cannot create complex subjects with the importer. It's just a single term. And the columns are repeatable. So again, let's take a look at an example. I'm not going to bother hiding those columns because there's only 2 lines. Again, I just did existing subject example, new subject example. So the existing subject example, again, just the ID. It turns out that matches Asian American art, so that shows up. And then for the other one, I just said ArchivesSpace training, and shows up. And you can see defaults to topical and unspecified ingested source, which is reasonable because it's probably not in any sort of controlled vocabulary out there. All right, moving on to notes. So the spreadsheet allows for the creation of the text of select note types, as well as the option of customizing the note label, which will otherwise use the default if you leave it blank, and selecting a published status different from the published status of the archival object as a whole. As mentioned before, if you leave this blank, it will use whatever the value provided in the published field for the archival object is. So you don't have to you don't have to say true for each one just because as long as the overall one is true. With the exception of conditions governing access, only a single text subnote can be added. So you can't do things like creating ordered lists. But you can still use mixed content as normal. So I did submit a ticket a few years ago asking for the remaining note types other than bibliography and index, which have a more complex data model, to be added to the importer. I would particularly like to see appraisal. That's one I use a lot that is not in here. It's A&W 1500 in case you are interested in adding your support. I will otherwise refrain from plugging my desired feature requests. One quirk of the spreadsheet is the notes are ordered by value, not by translation. So access restrictions comes up quickly. It doesn't fall under conditions governing access. Just be aware. So the options you do have are abstract. You have access restrictions. Now here is the one exception to the just text thing. You can do your machine actionable restrictions, which is fantastic, including the type and the begin end date. You would just, type this in and oh, look, Excel's being helpful. Well, that's not great. So that's, as I said, something to be aware of with that. And I will show you more about that later, what happens. But anyway, you do the access restrictions, begin end dates the same way you would do it in the staff interface. You've got acquisition information, which is immediate source of acquisition, arrangement, biographical, historical, custodial history, dimensions, general, physical description, physical facet, location, physical location, preferred citation, crossing information, related materials, scope and content, separated materials, use restrictions at the end. Again, it's by value, so it's instead of conditions governing use. If you wondering why it's these particular ones, it's because that's what Harvard was using when they made the plugin, and then people have separately asked for and gotten additional ones added over the years, which is why I put in that ticket for let's just do the rest of them. All right. Let me take a pause, take a drink. All right, let's actually put some data in. Do it live. Oh, actually, before I do that, I forgot to show the examples. So I just wanted to show a more complex example with the notes and subrecords. This is actually an old import of our artifact collection. from a very long time ago. And just wanted to show a few of the fields, including notes and some other things that you can do. So we've got, as well as title, we've got the component unique identifier. This was a very simple inventory, so all the hierarchical relationships are the same. And we've got dates, we've got extents, including like all kinds of things from when they were measuring these things, however many years ago when they first made this. Container information, DAC, oops. We got some custodial history notes, we've got scope notes, we've got some other things around here. Acquisition information. So yeah, lots of things like that. And then you can see, these nails. Don't ask me why we have nails in this collection. Here's your CUI, dates, 2 items. Well, I don't think, looks like these got reversed actually, the physical details and dimensions. So it's 2 nails from somebody's house. It's in box 25 if you're interested. Okay. All right, so now let's actually put some data in. So I've got some data prepared in advance, so you don't have to watch me type. So to actually do the importing, well, first you need to be editing. At this level, it is the only option when you go to load via spreadsheet. If you are at the resource record level, it'll say load via spreadsheet and give you these 3 options, which at least this one we're going to be talking about later. Well, someone else will be, I'm not talking about it. So load via spreadsheet. There is this neat validation feature. So you can test your import before running it. It's really great to do this if you're trying a complex import that creates additional records, because it's way more annoying to delete digital objects, agents, or subjects that were created incorrectly than it is to delete erroneous archival objects on top containers. I don't always do this if I've just got another basic inventory. I can always delete it and do it again, but anything more complicated, I'm definitely going to validate it. So if you validate, we'll do the simple example. Import from spreadsheet. So the way it works, different from in the old plugin days, it works as a background job, so you'll get a brief, should be brief thing where it says queued, it'll start running. It'll probably go real fast, especially if you're just asking it to simulate, and running. It'll show you this green screen. It used to be, again, in the plugin days, it says what it's going to do. It used to be in the plugin days, if you moved away from this screen, you could never see this again, but happily that's no longer the case, as I'll show. So once it's done, asks you to refresh, you can do that. And then what's great is you can download a report. And the report is currently underneath the bar that I just, for the sharing. The report, there it is, it's the same as the green, but what I find really useful is you have this info or error column, and every time I do an import after it's done, I download the CSV and I just like, all right, okay, this says boxes were created, that's good, and it doesn't have any errors, that's good. All right, I'm great, I'm done. Because it'll tell you for almost every kind of error you might have that there is an error. You will see some errors shortly. Okay, close that. Actually, no. All right, so this looks good. So close that tab. You have to close this again because it is running basically like it was imported. But all right, so then if we want to actually do it, just load, select again. Simple example. Don't want it to validate, just do it. Import. and then you refresh. I'll download it again because it looks slightly different, because it actually did it. You can see now it's actually telling you the ref IDs that it created and repositories and URI, blah, blah, still no errors. That's great. Created these new top containers. That's great. It will also actually give you here's all these records we made. If you wanted to click straight through to it. Otherwise, you can just close this window or tab, close this, it'll refresh, and now you've got the inventory, which is from our Allison Bechdel papers, a piece of that. And I so yeah, the error log's great, and you can actually if you, I don't know, closed your computer or something, and you've a couple days later, like, oh wait, what happened in that? What was that error? If you go to background jobs, it's all there. Tells you what the simple example gives you. You could re-download the input file if you want, and then it'll have the click view. You can go back and download that report, just to be sure in case something went wrong. Okay, let's break some stuff. Got some errors set up for you, sort of see what's happening. So not to spoil it, I'm just calling them one and so on. All right. And I'm not going to bother. I don't need to validate. I know what I'm doing. Let's see. Refresh. Download report. Uh-oh. We got problems. Now, for one, it's not creating top containers because they were already created. That's not bad. The bad thing is I've got an invalid date definition and must not be before begin. Oh, whoops. Instead of 1987, I typed 1997 as the begin date. So you can see it tells you exactly what it is. It also, you can tell where it was because it'll give you the exact row that the error happened on. With invalid date definitions, or sorry, with invalid date definition is what they call it, but an end being before begin, what it does is it just doesn't create a date subrecord at all. So if you've only got one and you imported, well, you can just, go and add that date subrecord. So you can see it did not get a date created. The other error I had in here was a single date, but it's got something on the date expression, an end date, the date expression. Oops. What it does there is kind of interesting. Let me see, what line is that? Line up, row 11, so summer grooming tips. You actually, I haven't fully looked into how this works exactly, but it actually still displays the full set of data, but it doesn't appear here. And I don't really know why it works that way, but it does. And if you go to inclusive, it's not there. So I don't know how it's showing it here at all, frankly. But it does. Anyway, that lets you know that you need to fix that. Great, that's it for that first example. Example 2. This one might be the most common one. At least here, it's the most common one. Oh, I've got lots of errors. That's not good. I'm not going to download the report because they're all the same. It says unable to create container instance one, missing container instance type. Oh, I forgot to put in mixed materials. Of course, of course. I must have hidden that column because it's always the same because we don't really do anything with that field. So what did it do? It created all the archival objects without the instances. Whoops. Well, I'm going to just delete that and redo because that's not what I want. Sample 3. Again, fairly straightforward one. Let's see if I go into that, what I actually tried to put in. English sounds right. That's a language, right? Oh, but I have my caps lock on. That's what it was. I put them all as English, so it doesn't create the language. Still creates all the objects with all the everything else, hopefully. Mm, no, I might have gotten the server mad at me. All right, while it's working on that, before we get to the last few errors, I'm going to talk a little bit about the some tips and tricks, and then we'll go back. Oh, nope, it's back, maybe. Yeah, so you can see it didn't add the language. Everything else is added. All right. It's like it might have gone down. All right, let's do a few more examples, error examples. Oh, simple one. I forgot to put in either an EAD ID or a URI. So it just won't create anything because everything needs to have that. That's another common one. So nothing gets created. All right, number 5. All right, this is one I actually didn't know about until I was doing the prep for this. This is what I was mentioning where there's a new validation requirement or newer validation requirement um, for the instances. So it gives me this weird unable to create, I don't know why it's doing that. Unable to create container instance 1 undefined method strip for nil class did you mean string. Well, I don't know what that means, but if I go to our example 5, you can see that I didn't include a top container type. Again, that was something that used to work. It no longer does, but and it gives you an error message. It makes me think that might not be intended because that's a really weird error message. but see, it is going to do the same thing as with the mixed materials. Any of that stuff being missing, or the instance being missing, it just won't create the top container. It'll create everything else. All right, last example is a little bit different. Actually, well, that's an error that I didn't mean to do because I had a typo in the ADID. Examples. Try that again. Okay. Oh, it worked. No problem. Well, you might get a hint of what's wrong because I called it testing and coding. Well, wait a minute. That's not a valid date. So yeah, that is an issue with the encoding, things getting encoded. ArchivesSpace will not throw an error. I think it technically still would work, maybe. I don't know if it would work as machine actionable. It sure looks bad. And you probably don't want it. So that's, again, something to keep an eye on with um, uh, the encoding in the spreadsheet, which is a good way to transition to talking about, let me close out all of these spreadsheets. To doing your own template. So just here's one I just done here at Smith. So one of the things I did that is not obvious is I forced formatting to be text for almost every column, not hierarchical relationship, but most things, so that they won't do that thing we just saw. And I also hid a bunch of fields we don't use. Like we don't use restrictions apply checkbox. We just use conditions given access. We think it's way better. So I've hid those. No one should be using them. And then we've got a lot of the drop downs I've set to be, as I mentioned, like we don't use, if we're doing an import, it's only really going to have 4 options. Should only have 4 options for description level. For the longer ones, I did this control values thing so that we can pull, so I didn't have to type it out. I just copied from a download of the control values. And then now the control values for language, you could type in, you should be able to type in, whatever, it's probably because that's not a language, whatever I was trying to type. But it's, it's all in there, which is pretty neat. And yeah, and you can, set different things. We've only got certain things that would be a top container versus things that might be a child, and you can just sort of customize things, and it doesn't take very long, and then you can have a better time of actually doing it, especially if you're going to give this off to students to work on. Just a few last sort of tips and tricks. If you want to, it is possible to delete many of the columns in the spreadsheet without causing an issue, but there's zero reason to ever do that. You just hide the ones you're not going to use. And you don't have to worry about making a mistake. If you want to add archival objects to multiple resource records, one thing, and I've had to do that a lot because of things like the example I'll show in a minute. momentarily, we had like a collection that was just like everything in the map drawers instead of like that being a location. It was like a finding aid collection thing. So what I did once I realized, knew which collections things were going to, was I just, basically broke them out into the collection that they are going to go to, put them in a dummy, here's how it looks, a dummy record, and then use the transfer functionality to just move them rather than making 15 different spreadsheets. So that's just a thing I've done. This is also where I found out that the import doesn't support containers without a container type, because we had some dummy top containers that we didn't bother putting container type in. Okay, final couple things. Spell check. ArchivesSpace doesn't have a built-in spell check. Your spreadsheet software does. Take advantage of it. And if you are confused by things, the user manual for section for the bulk importer is really, really good. I hadn't looked at it in a while before I started doing this. It has been updated recently. It is very detailed. A lot of, especially if you just forget one thing, very easy to get more information. So I will stop sharing, give my voice a rest, and I don't remember who is next, but they probably do.
Yes, it's me again, Malaka. I will share my screen. This one, share. All right. I'm going to cover how to load digital objects via a spreadsheet to already existing archival objects, I hope. So there is a bulk import template that allows you to import bulk digital objects and link them to existing archival objects in a resource record. So for example, this record has container instances for the archival objects, but it does not have any digital object instances. To add digital objects to these existing archival objects, we'll need to download the appropriate template by clicking on the gear menu again, and then going to bulk import templates. And then I want to import the digital objects, not the archival objects. So I'm going to use one of these two. Let's go ahead and download both of these so that you could see the differences. And we'll go here to the folder. All right, the CSV will open in Excel, since that's the file association I have. But you could see that it's just these two lines again, very brief information, and you got the header rows. It does not have an example row, so you'll have to figure it out yourself. But remember, there are the mapping tables available on the ArchivesSpace website to help you out a little bit. Or you could do the digital object template that has the lots of colors. Oh man, I gotta get that thing to there. The sharing bar won't go away, and it's in my way. So there, that's why I had to minimize it. So this is the Excel version. As you could see, it has color coding, and it'll have some of these have drop downs where you could just choose what will go in there from a list. In this latest version, because this spreadsheet has been updated over the years, and this version, you got digital object information. You also can now add dates, extents information, agents, subjects, and notes. Now remember, these don't go into the resource record. These are just for each individual digital object. So let's see, where am I? The template is designed to be flexible enough to accommodate different workflows. The first row in the is the place where you could put identifying information such as the name of your collection so that you don't forget what you're working on. So for example, I could type in Studio Ghibli here if I want. So that row, you could put anything in there. It doesn't really matter. As long as you don't edit the first 5 rows, you can hide, delete, or rearrange columns to suit your workflows. Make sure you start at line 6. I don't know if you noticed, but when I opened some of these templates up, you might already be down here at line 47. So don't just start typing. You need to make sure you start at the top. So digital objects, just like in ArchivesSpace, the only, well, the required fields are either the EAD ID or the resource URI. The EAD ID can be found. Let's go back to Studio Ghibli here. Dun, 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 dun. So the EAD ID can be found in the finding aid data information. So here is the EAD ID. I could just copy it and I could just paste it here if I want to. Or I could do the resource URI. I don't have to do both. I just need to do one of them. And the resource URI would be revert changes. It's the easy way to find the resource URI is I'm in edit mode. If you're in the view mode instead, this line will tell you what that URI is. So you could copy that and paste that into your spreadsheet instead if you want. I prefer the EAD ID, but I understand that there are places out there that don't use the EAD ID. So there you go. Let's see. The other required field is either the ref ID or the archival object URI. So let's go back here. So when they're talking about the ref ID or the archival object URI, they are talking about, of course, the archival object itself. So it's not going to be at the Studio Ghibli level. It's in these individual archival objects. So the ref ID is here in your record, and the archival object ID is up here in the URI. It's this number 7610. But you also have to have the resource URI stuff in front of it. So I'll show you how to get that. But first, let's do the reference ID. Now, nobody's going to want to click on every single one of these and copy the ref ID and put it into their spreadsheet. There is an easier way to get that information. If you go to the collection level record and you click on export and choose download container template. And then when you open that, it's a CSV and it has a number that's generated. So that's how you find it amidst all the files you've downloaded. Okay, so here is your archival object ID, and here is your reference ID. So what you could do is just copy that, and you can paste that into your ref ID field here. And so that's in there. And then since I didn't know how many rows, I only typed in the EAD ID once. But now that I know how many rows I'm going to do, you could use the drag handle to just copy that all the way down without having to type it. So at least if you have a typo in the EAD ID, you have a typo in all of them that way. So let's go back to the archival object URI. For that, you're going to need to use a formula in the spreadsheet is how I do it. The formula is you're going to take the text string slash repositories slash the number of your repository. In our example, it's going to be a 2. In an example I'll show you later, it'll be 3. So those numbers do change depending on how many repositories you have and which one you're in. And then it'll say archival underscore objects, and then followed by the archival object ID. So let's go in and put that into our container template. I usually use this blank field name box here and paste that. And then I'm going to follow it with an ampersand. And then I just select that field and then enter. And now I have the archival object ID URI correctly formatted. Now, if I take this and copy it into the bulk import spreadsheet, it's just going to take the formula and put it in there. So what you want to do is I usually just do Control C for copy, and then I go up here to paste and say paste values. And so now instead of this being a formula, it's actually the value itself. So I could actually copy that and paste it into here if I wanted to. Ta-da! So you only need one, either the ref ID or the archival object ID, whichever one you want to use will work. So I will get rid of these and use the ref ID. All right. So now we have the digital object ID. I'm going to leave this blank because it can be system assigned. And that's how I would prefer to do it. I'm not going to just make up my own IDs. The digital object title, if you leave this field blank, then the digital object it creates will have the same title as the archival object you're adding it to. So I'm going to leave mine blank. Do you want to publish your digital object or not? You could click on false or true. I'm going to click on true. And then, of course, you could just grab that and go, yay, true. VRA core level. This is another drop down. You have a choice of collection, image, or work. I'm going to go ahead and make it work. And then drag that down because they're all works. Even that last one I tried to skip. And then you could fill in the rest of these fields as desired or leave them blank. They're not actually required fields. So I'm going to say still image and pull that down. I'm going to leave the restrictions blank because the default is false. And then this particular digital object importer, unlike the CSV is different. You have 2 digital objects that you could add to an archival object. So you'll have the one that's the representative, and then you'll have the other one, the use one. So this is usually the thumbnail, and the other one is the link to the object. It doesn't have to be the thumbnail. You could just have your link to whatever digital object here. It's going to create it anyway. So that's why you seem to see this thing twice. One is for the one that's make representative and one that's for not. I can't really explain it. There's digital objects training sessions that we have recordings of that you could go and view if you need to know what the difference is between the two. So I have a URI that I'm going to enter, if I could copy it correctly, here. And then you can, I'm going to leave the use statement blank. I'm going to do the actuate as a drop down, and I'm going to say on request. As you can see, there's none, on load, and other. The show attribute, I'm going to use new, so it creates a new window. If you're interested in putting in the file format and the file size and the checksum and a caption, feel free. Let's go here. And then this is the URI for the non-representative example. And so I will fill that out, Shift Home, Control C, and paste that there. And so that's the other one. And I'm not going to have it with a use case or an actuate or attribute. So that's how you would fill in the digital object stuff. And as shown earlier with the archival objects, the rest of these fields are the same as you would fill out in as was already filled out in the spreadsheet. So there's no reason for you guys to sit there and watch me fill that out. I of course just have the I have a filled out form, and here it is. So here's my EAD, my ref ID, true work still image, and some URIs and some more URIs, and I didn't bother filling out any of the rest of that stuff. I'm going to go ahead and close that and close the other one. Now, I discovered a bug. Some people have the bug, some people don't have the bug. It's one of those kind of bugs, which means they cannot figure out what's going on particularly. But just so that you could see what an error looks like, I'm going to go ahead and load the spreadsheet as I have it into here and show you what's going on. And then I'll show you how it works in my database, where it does work. So you would be at the collection level, and you would be in edit mode. So I'll click on edit. And then you have load via spreadsheet. So you would click on load via spreadsheet. And you have three choices when you're at the collection level: import archival objects, add digital objects to archival objects, or link top containers. So what I want to do is add digital objects to archival objects. And I click there. Well, now it's fixed. It might work. We'll see. The other day when I clicked on it, the radio button stayed here, and but this thing was highlighted, and I think that was the problem with it. So we'll see if it works. So I select the file, and we're going to do the training database. So we'll do OK. And we want to validate it. I always recommend validating because it's such a pain to have to delete all these if you make a mistake and want to start all over. So you go import from spreadsheet, and it does the background job. And it worked. Yay! You can click on refresh page. You could download the report if desired. I mean, obviously you could see from here that it worked, but if it was a really long one, it might be easier to just download the report to see what the messages say. So it says that the digital objects would be created. Yay! For all of them. So in theory, it should work. So we will close that report. No, I don't want to save. And then we'll close that, and we'll go back here. You have to close it again, and then open it, and then add digital objects, select file, and then we will open that. See, look, now it has the dot over here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on import spreadsheet because in theory I validated it and it said it's going to work, but I wouldn't be surprised if it fails. Yes. So it said there's an error detected, processing stopped at row 1005, no header fields. So this message means nothing. And if you click on the download report, it gives you nothing. Which is why I think because that radio dial button changed, back to importing of archival objects instead of the digital objects. I think it's assuming it's trying to tell you that you're using the wrong template to import, but I am using the right template. So here I have, my version is 3.5. And so in version 3.5, all those extra fields are not going to work, even if I had filled them out. But at least the digital objects will be attached. So let me do load via spreadsheet. You'll see they, in version 4 is when they added those dots. They should take them away. I click on add digital objects. I do that and open, import from spreadsheet. Oh, and this is our test database, which of course doesn't have a lot of power, so that's why it's pretty slow. But it helps us get test things. So I could download the report, I could see the log, and I could also see all the digital objects that it created. Yay! So let's go here. This is a digital object that it created. Princess Mononoke. I had, here is the on request new. In theory, that's the thumbnail. And because I added 2, it does add that second one with the information. And it links to the archival object. So now Studio Ghibli says moving images and digital objects next to it. So that's handy. And it has that instance there. All right. I think that's it. Yes, constraints. Only one digital object can be associated with a single archival object. So you could have 2 different links, but it's still only one digital object record that's associated with the archival object record. So you can't do multiples. And yeah, that's it as far as constraints goes. So that's it, unless there's any pressing questions. Then we could go on break. All right, we have a 15-minute break. So I have that it's 35 minutes after the hour. So we will come back at 12:50. Does that sound good for everyone? The recording. I believe you will get a link to the recording from the same email where that sent the agenda and other resources that you received. So you should get that. And it will also be posted if you're an ArchivesSpace member on the ArchivesSpace Confluent site. All right, break time until 12:50. See, and we're all about the digital objects again. So there are additional types of importing in ArchivesSpace besides the load via spreadsheet. And to get to that, there are 3 different ways. You could click on Create, Background Job, and then click on Import Data. And this will get you right to the Import Data page where you could select what file type you have and import it. Or you could go through the Browse menu where you click on Browse and then Background Jobs, and then click on Create Job, and then select Import Data. And you're at that same page again. Or you could click under the Gear menu and then click on Background Jobs, and then Create Job and Import Data. So as you could see, The first option under Create, if you could remember it's there, is your best bet if you want to be efficient because it'll get you right to this page. Let's go back to the background job page. So this is the background page. It contains a listing of the active and archived background jobs for the selected repository. Background jobs include imports, reports, and printing a resource record to PDF. You can use this page to see how many import jobs are pending in the queue, to see which jobs are completed and which jobs failed, or to call up the import summary for an individual background job. So we did the load via spreadsheet today. We could click on view and we could see the log of where it failed again if we wanted to. So that's handy to have. The records that you can load as CSV from the import data page are accession CSVs, digital object CSVs, location, and subjects. Let's go ahead and use the background jobs to upload a CSV of digital objects. So first you have to download the template. Again, these are under the gear menu, bulk import templates. So instead of using the bulk import digital objects spreadsheet, which will create digital objects and attach them to existing archival objects, I want to create brand new digital objects that just hang out there in space and that if I want to, I could link them later. So here's the digital object CSV. Again, I would click on download and then we'll open it to see what it looks like. So the one on the right is the digital object CSV. It has a header row and it has an example row. Again, remember to delete your example row before importing it if you don't want it as part of your data. The information that I have on the left spreadsheet is the digital object CSV import map. It is unlike the accession. It is, oh yeah, this one is in alphabetical order too. But then so is this. Dum-dum. So it tells you what each field is. And it's good to have it open to figure out, for example, here for the digital object publish, you have 0, 1, false, true, and it says it's case sensitive for these. And you'll notice here in your example data, it says digital object publish, and it has in all caps true. So if the digital object mapping is not lying, then this field is incorrect. I'm not going to try to figure it out. I'm just going to use 0, 1. So we will, where am I? Oh, so tips for using the CSV template. You can delete or retain blank columns. Just make sure that the remaining fields follow the same order as the template, so don't change the order. Again, I'm paranoid, and some of those error messages you get are so vague that you can't understand what they mean. So I just hide columns that I don't need. I feel it's safer. The values in the date one type and date one labels should be lowercase. For example, little c creation as opposed to capital C creation. Know your dependencies. For example, if you use the extent container summary, then you must also include the extent number and extent type. More information about the format of the data can be found in the crosswalk, which I downloaded from the ArchivesSpace homepage resources. So as you can see in the CSV, this thing goes on and on and on and on for quite a while. So just like the digital object that attaches to the archival object, you could do, you obviously need information about the digital object, but you could also add information about the donor, agents like creators, and additional information about the digital object itself. These would be events. So you could say, oh, yes, we did send a digital object agreement and what the date is, etc. on that. What else? The user defined fields, you could put those in if you want. Date fields, extent, and then that's pretty much it. Let's go ahead and start filling this out. I'm going to go ahead and delete this example row because it'll just get in my way. There. So you could delete that row. Just make sure you keep that top row. A digital object record, there's only two fields that are required. The digital object ID, otherwise known as identifier, and the title. So let's go to the title field, which is, I'm not sure, I think it's H here. Yeah. So why wouldn't they put that first? I don't know. They didn't ask me. So I'm going to add a title, which is that thing. Control V. And then I want to add a digital object ID. And it's that thing. Control V. All right, if I wanted to, I could upload this spreadsheet right now and it will create a digital object because those are the only two required fields. Yay! But that seems silly to use a spreadsheet just to add that information. You probably want to add the URIs for the digital objects you want to link to. So let's go through some of these other fields. For example, column E is whether or not it should be published. I'm going to put a 1 so that it does get published. Column D here is the digital object level, otherwise known as the VRA core kind of thing. This information can be found in a controlled value list in your ArchivesSpace instance. So if you go up here to system, now not everybody could see these lists, so it's probably a good idea for people who can see the list to create commonly used values lists for people to pick from, either in a customized template like Dan had made or in a separate Word document. So manage control value list. I'm going to go here to digital object type. We'll go with type. So here you'll have the value and you'll have translations. You'll always know if it's a ArchivesSpace supplied value because it'll be in lowercase, and if it's multiple words, it'll have the underscore. Whereas if you, because you can create values in here if you want. If you create the value, it'll only let you assign one thing, and it'll make the value and the translation exactly the same. So if you typed in, I don't know, discography with a capital D, it would be a value here would be discography, and the translation would be discography. So that's just a helpful hint there. So I always use the values because I've been working in this thing for too long, and the bugs usually involve the translation. So you have a better chance of getting it correct in these templates if you use the value rather than the translations. So I'm going to copy still image here, and then we'll go back to our spreadsheet. And that will go into column F, which is the type. So it'll do still underscore image. Restrictions, I want that to be false, so I could leave it blank because the default value is false. According to everything else, these mappings, we will call them a guide and not a rule because some of these are so out of date, and some of these are actually incorrect, which we'll see when we get over to the agents. Column K. So let's say I want to add an agent. So I have to have a role. And here it says the role is either creator, source, or subject. So I am going to make this a creator with a little c, creator. And then the next is agent type. And here it says for agent type, let's see. You got agent person, agent corporate entity, or agent family, etc. Um, I have a person, so I'm going to make mine agent underscore person. Right. And then the rest of this information here is actually all about donor information, not necessarily the creator. So I'm going to skip all of these fields and move on to here where we have the agent name, dates, etc. So let's go to column double A. So that's a lot of fields. Okay. So agent name, dates. This person was born in 1804 and died in 1881. And then the next field is the name, description, citation. I'm going to leave that blank. I'm going to leave the note blank and the description type blank and the fuller form blank. Now here, agent name, name order. If you go here, it's direct or inverted. You actually need to fill this out with either inverted or direct. It won't default to one or the other. And so I'm going to put it as inverted, inverted. Dun, dun, dun. And then we'll go over here to this one. Well, okay, so that's the number prefix. So you probably are used to seeing these when you're creating agent records. So these are the same fields. This is the agent name, primary name. And so we're going to fill in the person's last name for Gould because we're doing it as an inverted record. And then it doesn't have a qualifier. And here's the rest of the name, John. A very easy name. Huh. So John Gould is going to be the personal name I want. You could put in the rules. I'm going to put in RDA. You could put the name sort type, which I'm not going to do, but I'm going to say that the source is LCNAF if I want to. And so you could see by scrolling through that there are additional columns for events, and it's easier to see here in the mapping. If I can find my mouse, there it is. Okay. So you've got, after the names, you've got the acknowledgement sent, received. So you could add all of these statuses as part of your importing in of the digital object itself if you want. And it does give you some information about some of these fields. I'm not going to fill that stuff in. What I really want to fill in is the file information and the URIs and all that. So if you scroll down here on this mapping, it's never mentioned. So they don't give you any pointers on how to fill in those fields. So, and it's obviously an afterthought because those fields are all the way at the end. So here's subjects, and then here's finally your URIs. I found that interesting, but whatever. The file version section starts at column CY. And like I said, it's not in the mapping. The file URI is required if you include this section at all. It's one of those dependencies. Know your dependencies. Supply an identifier for a file associated with a digital object accessible on the web or in a file directory. So it has to start with either HTTP or HTTPS for it to recognize it. And I have, this is it, one. So I'm going to type that in there. And you could indicate here whether you want it to be published or not. And I do want it to be published. This is the use statement. I'm going to do image, thumbnail. And again, this is from the controlled vocabulary list. I'm not just making these things up. And then the actuate attribute is, I'm going to leave that blank. But the show in attribute, I'm going to make it embed. And then let's scroll over a little bit more. I have here the file format name, and I'm going to say that it's a JPEG, JPEG. You can fill in these other fields if desires, the checksums, the method, etc. I'm going to leave that blank. So that would be one row. I've obviously pre-filled in a sheet about toucans. They're all toucans. Yes, I saw a Fruit Loops commercial, and that's what gave me the idea. So these are the identifiers for the works. They're all works. I want them all to be published, still images. These are the Latin names for the toucans. And two of these have creators and their agent persons. And we have their date. I want the names to be inverted. John Gould, Henry Richter, and their sources. Didn't fill out any of those fields, but here is our URIs. This needs to be changed to 1, 1, 1, 1. Okay. And I believe actually the capitalized true does work. I've tried it before and it seems to work just fine. So here's the URIs, a thumbnail embed, and then this last one here is the caption. So this will be what displays underneath the digital images. So we'll save that and then close that and don't save, close that. And let's go here. We'll go to create, background job, import data. Now here's the thing that you will get wrong eventually. It might not be today, it might not be tomorrow, but you will eventually get it. You're going to forget to set the import type. Don't worry, at least it won't add it as an accession record. It'll just come back with a wonky error message. So make sure you pick the correct file format. And so I have a digital object CSV. You could click on add file and scroll to where it is if you want, or I love this thing. You could actually just drag and drop. So if you have the folder open, you just drop it in there. And here it is. Now, if you grab the wrong one, you could click on the trash can over here to delete it. Unlike the bulk import, there's no validate. You either do it or you don't do it. So I'm going to click on Start Job and see what happens. It's next in the queue. It's got a nice log going as opposed to error, error. So it should work. Refresh page. And down here, it says that it created a personal agent for John Gould and Henry Richter, and that it created some digital objects with these names. So let's go look at that first one. So it is just the digital object. Ta-da. And here's the title, and it put in the identifier, publish is true, and the work and the still image, no restrictions. And it has the file version so that I have the lovely little bird picture there. Publish is true, representative, and here's the caption. So, and it's a thumbnail. And here's the linked agent that it created. And like Dan said, when you create via these spreadsheets, it doesn't have a lot of information, but at least it did put in, Gould, John, date as an inverted form and the source, etc. So that is pretty much it for importing via a CSV. So now there should be plenty of time for Rebecca to show you this brand new functionality that everybody's been begging for. So I will stop sharing and turn it over to her.
All right, great. Thank you. And let me get my screen shared here. Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Rebecca Bagno. I'm the Special Collections Librarian at the University of North Carolina at Wilmington. And in the last part of this training today, I am going to be covering a new functionality called Bulk Update of Archival Objects. This is a new feature that is now part of the core code of ArchivesSpace as of version 4.0. It's based on a plugin developed by Hudson Malonglo for the new school. So if you were not running 4.0, which I'm sure many aren't, it's possible that you could have this plugin installed on your instance and gain access to these features and this functionality. So essentially, this functionality allows you to download a set of archival objects from a resource record via a spreadsheet. The spreadsheet can then be edited outside of the application. You can apply many changes to the selected archival objects. Once you've finished making the edits, you import the data back into ArchivesSpace via a background job. So this is a great way to perform data cleanup. You can make existing or edits to existing metadata or add new metadata such as dates and notes. It's also extremely helpful if you have a large rehousing or renumbering project that you need to undertake, or as a question came up in the Q&A, if you find out more information about existing archival objects and you want to add that later, this is a way that you could do that. This functionality basically eliminates the need to manually edit items within the application or know how to use the API to make bulk changes, which is especially helpful for that renumbering feature alone, but also provides endless opportunities to enhance existing metadata. So let's get started by navigating to a resource record that we're going to work with to demonstrate this. And I am going to use, oh, hold on, log in here. Okay, let's try again. And let me move my screen out of the way. Okay, I am going to use a film script collection that we have here in our own repository. It's full of legacy data. It was migrated from Archon to ArchivesSpace and hasn't been touched. So it's got a lot of fun things that we can take a look at. The first thing that you need to know about this bulk update of archival objects is that you can only do this within a single resource record. So you cannot export data from multiple resource records, edit it, and then re-import it. It's only one record at a time. To use this feature, it is helpful to know the structure of your resource record, the hierarchy, how things are arranged, as well as what tasks you're trying to accomplish and where in the record you might be trying to make those changes. Sometimes it might be the whole resource record, but sometimes you might only want to work in a section or a part of it, and that's fine too. So for example, we'll be working in the television script series here, and we'll use Dawson's Creek as an example. I've added some errant dates so we can clean those up, but we might also want to add dates to all of these additional film scripts. I know that all of these scripts have episode numbers, so perhaps I'd want to insert that into the title field. You can see there's a fairly wonky box numbering system going on, and perhaps I want to make this collection be numbered sequentially. I might want to add scope notes to these objects to enhance the description and capture revisions made in the scripts. You might want to delete notes from archival objects. There's a variety of things that you could do. Before we get started, there are a few things that you cannot do. You cannot export archival objects from a resource record delete them in the spreadsheet, and expect them to be deleted when you re-import that data into ArchivesSpace. You can only delete from within the application using this functionality. Similarly, you cannot add new archival objects to the spreadsheet and import them using the bulk update. You can do that with different spreadsheets and a different feature that we've talked about earlier in this training with load via spreadsheet. And finally, you cannot reorder these archival objects in a spreadsheet and expect them to be to reflect that order when you re-import the data. That does not happen, so you will need to do that in the application as well. Additionally, there are two configuration file options that you need to be aware of and request from your sysadmin or whoever manages your ArchivesSpace instance if these are things that would impact your workflow or options that you would want to enable. And we'll cover them again as we get to them in the workflow. But the first one allows for a checkbox to be checked when you import your data and you want to create missing top containers. And the second allows for you to delete notes from the spreadsheet and have them be deleted when you import the data back into ArchivesSpace. In both cases, the default option is set to false, which means the checkbox is not checked and you cannot delete notes. So you would need to enable them to true to make those changes happen. And we'll talk about this again. So let's get started. If we want to edit and make changes and export data, the first thing that you need to be aware of is that you need to be at the collection level of a resource record. So you can see I am there, and then you'll see this menu here under the container list, and you will navigate to more, and then select Generate Bulk Archival Object Spreadsheet. So this will take you to a selection page. As you can see, the hierarchy of our resource record is reflected here. We have the collection level and all of the series listed below. If I check these boxes to select things in the collection, it will select the entire collection. So now I have 2,100 records selected. But you can also just select a space that you want to work in. So for example, if I want to do television scripts and just Dawson's Creek, I could do that. There is a little bit of wonkiness in terms of trying to get rid of things, so you have to double click sometimes, and you just have to play around with it to get used to the way the functionality works. But we'll select Dawson's Creek here, so now I've got 105 records selected. So that's the first step. If you scroll down, the second step is to determine which fields you would want to include in the spreadsheet that exports. And these fields correlate to columns in your spreadsheet. So depending on your task at hand, you may want to include all of these, or just a few, or even just one or two. Some other things to consider are safeguards that you might want to put into place if other people are going to be using these spreadsheets to make edits. So like, let's say you're having students use your spreadsheet, perhaps you would not want to include the component unique identifier or a ref ID and have them accidentally change that and mess up your data in ArchivesSpace. So just be aware of what you're trying to accomplish. For this example, we'll leave everything selected so you can see how that reflects in the spreadsheet. And finally, this third step is perhaps the most confusing part of this process. And this is where you determine the number of subrecords of each note type and other fields that will be included in your spreadsheet. So the first one is called minimum subrecords, and it says the minimum number of already extant subrecords of each type to be included. So for example, if you have dates selected and you have 3 dates here selected, if you were to have more than 3 date subrecords included for any archival object, only the first 3 would be included in your spreadsheet. For most use cases, this is a fairly high number, so you wouldn't necessarily need to adjust this. If you only have 1 date subrecord, then it's only going to include 1 in the spreadsheet. The next is called extra subrecords, and this is additional subrecords in addition to the existing one that you have. So for example, if you have one date subrecord and you select 3 extra subrecords, your spreadsheet will include 4 date subrecords in total, which will make a little bit more sense when you see the spreadsheet. But even so, it's taken me a few times to try and play with this to fully understand what happens when you make changes to these numbers. Finally, the minimum notes is the minimum number of notes that you would want to include. So if you have 2, then there would be 2 sets of scope and content notes subrecords. And 2 is probably fine. If you wanted to add more, you could change it to 3 or 1, depending on what you're trying to do. So we will leave this alone so you can see how this reflects in the spreadsheet via the default setting. So once you've made your selections, the next step is to click Download Spreadsheet. And then we'll open that. It's opened on a different screen. Okay. So are we able to see this spreadsheet? Looks like it. It's moving slow. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Okay. So this is what the spreadsheet looks like when you export. The first thing to note is that it is protected. So if you try to type into a field or cell outside of the exported archival objects, you're going to get a message saying basically you can't do that, you need to unprotect it. Depending on the tasks you're trying to accomplish with the bulk update, you may want to leave this alone. If you're using formulas or you're doing some advanced data entry, you're probably going to want to unprotect your spreadsheet, which you can do by right-clicking on updates and changing those settings. The second thing to note about the spreadsheet is that there are 2 pages here. You'll do all of the work that you need to accomplish in the updates sheet. The enumerations sheet essentially lists all of the controlled values that are in ArchivesSpace for each field that has exported into the spreadsheet. So this is not something that we really want to mess with, and you won't need to use it because this spreadsheet has some nice features. One thing I really like about this particular spreadsheet for ArchivesSpace is that every field with a controlled value list has a controlled list in the spreadsheet. So you don't need to worry about adding data to it that might cause an error. Now, if you have customized some of your controlled value lists, you're going to want to take a look at that and see if they export. I've noticed that sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. So it can be a little trial and error to figure that part out. If we take a look at this and scroll over, you can see what those date exports look like in terms of the subrecords that we selected. So here I have one date subrecord, and then I have for extra subrecords it was set to 3. So here's 1, 2, and a third one over here for date expressions. If I scroll over and we look at extents, none of these archival objects had extents, so there's only 3 sets of extents for 3 extra subrecords, and so on. You can see that this spreadsheet gets pretty unruly pretty quickly, depending on the selections you made for those subrecords. So it's really helpful to know what you're trying to do and change those numbers so you don't get caught with all of these extra fields that you don't need to use. Okay, so let's make a few changes so you can see how this works. We're going to do it in real time and hope that everything works out. So I know, for example, that these episodes have episode numbers. So I'm going to add a couple in here so you can see. If you wanted to change the level of description, you could. So we could change this to item. You might want to leave it alone. It's up to you. Let's see, we've got some dates here that are crazily formatted. So perhaps we want to fix those and make them DAX compliant. So I could update this, let's see, and add a structured date. I could remove this end date here and fix this date expression. Perhaps you need to add new dates. You could do so. you could really make any sort of changes you want there. If we keep going, the next thing we'll hit are these box numbers. So let's say we know we want to renumber all of these boxes. We want to make them numbered sequentially, and we want to create boxes that do not exist in this resource record in ArchivesSpace. So we will go ahead. I know 30 is not a number in this collection, so we'll add that. In theory, you could do that for this whole sub-series here, but we'll just leave the 2 top containers so you can see. Let's see, we want to add a scope note. We'll scroll all the way down till we get to scope and contents. And let's get that a little bit closer to these episodes. So you can see that there are 2 scope and contents notes because the minimum notes subrecords was set to 2. So if we want to add some notes, we could say this is a blue script, and there are some handwritten director's notes on here. And perhaps this is a goldenrod script for script revisions. Okay, so you can see that the possibilities are pretty endless in terms of the amount of data that you could add to these existing archival objects. You could potentially use formulas in these fields to quickly reformat data to make significant changes. The only thing that I want to caution against is retaining formulas in your spreadsheet inadvertently, so make sure that you're pasting values and keeping values only. And same if you're working with this in OpenRefine or in other places, you want to be careful that you're not reformatting the spreadsheet, and so that way you not throw any errors when you go to import on the backside. So let's save this and we'll close it. When you return to ArchivesSpace, you do need to close out of these 2 screens. So you'll click done, and then if you click cancel on the selection page, it will return you to your resource record. The bulk update of archival objects is a background job. So you'll need to navigate to background jobs to import that data, which you can do through create background job or through the gear menu and open background jobs here. So I'll open that. Once you're in the background jobs section, you'll want to create a job and select bulk archival object updater. So here is where the first configuration file option comes in. This box is checked. So for this instance of ArchivesSpace, we have the configuration set to true. The default configuration is set to false, where this box is not checked. This is a small thing, but depending on how many top containers you might be creating outside of the application, you'll want to just remember this because it could potentially impact your import depending on how it's selected. So let's check that and add a file. We'll go downloads, this one. Okay, and let's start this job. So we'll run the log like it does for any other import of data. And we'll wait, depending on how much you have, it will take a little bit of time or a lot of time. So when we look at this log, we can see that our new top containers exist here, 30 and 31. We can see that the edits that we made to the metadata for the title and the date are here. And these are all of the archival objects that we updated with a new container indicator. So we'll refresh that. Obviously, they show up in the new and modified records section. If we close and refresh in the resource record and navigate back to Dawson's Creek, you can see those changes are reflected. So here's our episode number. In the title now, our date, the updated container indicators. If we click into one of these, we can see our scope note listed here, and our new top container is created. And you can go in there and add a container profile and a location or do whatever you need to do. So that is the basics of the bulk update. Now let's take a look at what happens in terms of trying to delete notes. So I've added a few notes to this series here so we can delete them. So we'll go back to FinCanon at the research level, select more, and then generate bulk archival object spreadsheet. This time we'll do the film trailers. And let's change some of these selections so you can see what happens in the spreadsheet. So we'll just have level of description. Let's say maybe we want to keep the ref ID. And I know that all of those notes that I want to delete are in or listed as a general note. This time I know that there's only one of those, so I'm just going to select one. And we don't need any extra subrecords because we're going to be deleting some notes. And we'll change this to 1. So this will impact what that spreadsheet looks like. Let's click download. And we'll open that up. Okay, and we'll edit and make this a little bit bigger so you can see it. Okay, so now you can see that this is a much more manageable spreadsheet, significantly less fields, and perfect for a very specific task. So let's try to delete these notes. So I'm just gonna delete them and save my spreadsheet. And then we'll close that and navigate to the background jobs section. And then create a new job and select bulk archival object updater and find our file. So spoiler alert, this is going to fail. And you can see if we look at these errors here, the error says deleting a note is disabled. Use app config to change it to true. So this is actually a helpful error message where most log errors are not helpful. This is where that default configuration option for deleting notes is set to false. So if you want to be able to delete notes from existing archival objects, you will need to have your sysadmin change that to true so you can do that. Otherwise, you will encounter this error and it will not import or update any of the changes that you have made beyond just deleting notes. It automatically fails the job. So that is something to be aware of when you're making changes. So, and that is the basics of bulk archival object update. It's pretty straightforward, and it's a great resource for updating like collection container lists in bulk and doing a lot of legacy data cleanup. So I'm going to stop sharing and we will move on to the Q&A section of this training.
All right, we have one. Are the number of notes fields shown only governed by the minimum notes section, or does the extra selection affect notes as well?
I believe, and I want to put an asterisk by that the minimum notes selection is what governs notes and not the extra notes section. So the extra notes is only for the other fields that export in the spreadsheet.
All right, we answered most of the questions via typing, but if anybody else has questions, feel free to pop them into the Q&A and we'll get to them. I know that was a lot to cover with the importers, and of course, the troubleshooting is always fun. We all need t-shirts that says, I love spreadsheets with the big X on them. They are interesting. While we're waiting for people to type, please fill out your post-session summary This is, of course, the first time we've ever offered this particular session, and we would love feedback. Was it too fast, too slow, not enough information, too much information, etc.? All right, Wendy says, a quick note. You can also use the bulk editor to add digital objects to archival objects. I didn't know that. There you go. What's the use case for importing digital objects that aren't attached to an existing resource or archival object? It depends on what you're using ArchivesSpace for. For example, we are using it as, because we don't have a DAM really. So it's the system of record. And so we have things in our Luna installation that came from our special collections. So we have information about it as a digital object in our digital objects section, but it's not actually attached to a resource record because that's not how we're choosing to display it. I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in with some examples of why you would have a digital object not attached to anything else. All right, and Mariella says, we have some records that have been merged a lot over the years with many of the same types of notes. Will they all show regardless of the minimum notes setting?
Okay, I think I can try to answer this one. So with the bulk archival object update, the minimum notes, the largest number that you can set it to is 3. So in theory, if you had 4 scope and contents notes, for example, attached to an archival object record, only the first 3 would show up. However, I would probably try and play around with that and do some comparison to see if that is in fact true in terms of what the export shows. Sometimes it seems like there's more there than there should be. So you might find that all of your notes show, but the default setting is up to 3 extant subrecords for note types.
And Danielle asks, is there a means to add a representation or complex digital objects via the spreadsheet? Complex digital objects, I'm assuming, it's all about terminology. When I hear that, I'm thinking that you want a digital object record with siblings, and the answer to that is no, you cannot do that via the spreadsheet. And then to add a representation, you can in the digital objects attached to archival objects spreadsheet, because I know I just looked at that one, you can make one of those representative, if that's what you mean. I don't know about in the archival object one if it has the one URI is for the representative and one is for the master copy or whatever. Maybe Dan can remember since he was looking at that one not too long ago.
Sorry, I was trying to find my unmute. Yeah, yeah, you can do that. It's got the representative option.
Cool. All right. Any other questions? Aha. I know that you said that the bulk update of archival objects can only work within one resource record at a time, but is there a way in ArchivesSpace to bulk change, say, a copyright note across multiple resource records? Just a yes/no answer is fine.
Hi, this is Laura. I'll take a stab at this. The quick answer is not through anything that we've shared today. And it depends, the caveat is what you mean by within ArchivesSpace. I think you'll find that a lot of folks are doing this either through API actions or other advanced ways of interacting with this data. not through any of the things that we've discussed today.
Yeah, and
Just-
Patsy mentioned the bulk find and replace. That thing is scary.
It also, sorry to interrupt, but the bulk
Mhm.
find and place also only works on a single resource
Single
record
resource
at a time.
Yeah.
I actually, it's interesting. It's said beta since it's been in there, has all these scary messages. It seems to work great when on the rare occasions where I actually use it, but
That's good. We set it up for one thing and one thing only, and we cleaned up all our records and we're done. Yay! Well, if there are no further questions, we'll give you 15-ish minutes back in your day to eat lunch or whatever you want to do. Thank you, everybody.